Coming up in this episode is Israa Nasir. Her book is Toxic Productivity. We had a great conversation. There were so many mic drop moments. One of them for me is bartering achievement for belonging.
She really explains toxic productivity, how it comes to be, how it's perpetuated. And the line I liked in her book is calling for a radical reimagining of what productivity means. And that's so much of what we're doing on this podcast as well. So it was an honor, a joy, and enlightening to have a conversation with Israa today. And we hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Untrained. Hey, Whitney.
Hey, Iris.
We are very excited about our guest today. I think we reached out to Israa Nasir because of her book, Toxic Productivity. She's a psychotherapist, speaker, and founder of the digital mental health brand Well Guide on Instagram. She's been a licensed therapist for 10 years in Ontario, Canada, and now in New York State. I'm in Rochester, New York, so I wasn't very far away. And, she's published this book. We love it. We want her to have a conversation around toxic productivity and wherever it may lead us, emotional regulation, all of the things. So, Whitney, you're usually in first with a question.
Yeah. Well, I found you online and I thought, oh my gosh, this is one of the most aligned pieces of work to the Untrained podcast that I've ever seen. And in reading the book, you use the word unlearn. We just use untrain a lot, and rather you use the word unlearn. And I want to start, I think a good place to start is having you define, because this is something we work with day in and day out. We see toxic productivity. We work with it in our clients. How would you define toxic productivity?
Toxic productivity is a mindset. So it's a series of habits that are connected to a foundational set of emotions. And in the mindset, we relate to our productivity in a very unhealthy way. So productivity and achievement and outcome become a reflection of how good we feel about ourselves. So there's this deep connection between your sense of self-worth and the things you achieve. Mm-hmm. So what happens is how good you feel about yourself becomes external to you and dependent on external variables that we think we have control over, but we don't really. So in order to control the outcome of this achievement-oriented mindset, we become singularly focused on doing more, constantly being busy and setting up goals and achieving things. And that singular focus moves us away from prioritizing really important things like our physical health, our emotional health, our mental health, and our relational health. So it's this very one-track mind around needing to feel good about yourself to get a sense of worth and belonging through the outcomes that you achieve. And so naturally it becomes a very chaotic place.
I wrote a book, Body Image Inside Out, and it's so similar to if my body looks a certain way, then I will feel better. And the two things I want to name is that we are in a culture, at least many of us are in cultures that will reward us for those efforts. So there is a short-term reward that may feel good and may fuel more of that singular focus. Can you speak to that?
Oh gosh, 1,000,000%. And you kind of connected to your book. I think about this a lot where we have taken this toxic productivity mindset to our health and wellness.
Yes.
So people have become completely obsessed with optimizing their bodies. And you see all this biohacking and longevity science coming out, and people are just, swearing by ice baths and saunas and red light. And while all of those things are independently good and can be beneficial, what happens in this mindset is you lock into trying to optimize. And so you create this checklist of things you have to do in order to feel good about your body, right? Which you could potentially feel good about the home you live in inherently for the fact that it keeps you safe and alive, right? But we've moved so far away from that. I got really passionate there and I forgot your original question.
Oh, you totally answered it. And I'm just going to keep going because I can't go back because now we've moved on. And I think one of the things that we lose out on is the relationship with ourselves. We're in a relationship with the external validation. We're in a relationship with the external metrics of our health or our growth or whatever. And we don't develop that internal relationship with ourselves and who we are. Sometimes we don't even know because we've never taken the time to go and ask.
Yeah, that's my question, because I feel like, we're both Olympians, or I made an Olympic team, and that is rewarded, right? So, and I almost think that's almost toxic productivity too, right? So you sort of forget everything else and you put it all in, and then you go for this goal, and it's very well rewarded, even if at the end of it you might be, kind of stuck or just in not a great place. So I'm just thinking, what is it about our culture? And maybe the word isn't culture, but why are we so obsessed with productivity? Why do we continually reward it? Is it easy to reward productivity? We all fall into the trap. And by we all, I mean, most of us work with high performers. How is it that we fall into that trap?
I think there's like a couple of things that come into play. And one being that the system is set up to reward you in this way. And so you get that dopamine hit of achievement. And the more you get it, the less inclined you feel to go inwards and see if it's even aligned emotionally with you or by your values. And that's why you kind of see this, in years past, you would hear about these midlife crises, right? Like it looks a little different now and people relate to it differently. But in the past, like that's what it was, because there comes a point where you're like, wait, I'm pursuing these things. It gave me the benefits. I've got the house and the picket fence and all of the things, but I'm not feeling very happy. And then you see people kind of like do a lot of things in order to find that happiness, specifically around that time. But I think our culture, like it's really difficult to talk about this without talking about like the system. So the system is like a meritocracy. The system is late stage capitalism right now. The system is huge inequities. And so I think it's really challenging to step out of this mindset, right? Because there are very real drawbacks to tapping out. Because if, let's say you're like, you're the primary breadwinner in your home and you have to be on all the time. Otherwise your job will go to somebody else, right? And so when I talk about this, I'm really mindful of like coming into the space of telling people to be less unhealthy, productive is a very privileged state. And so when we think about our lives, we have to think about making small changes to our productivity habits instead of like rehauling our whole lives and, like quitting our job and like all of those things that sometimes you see people do. I think the point here is how can you have a healthier relationship to productivity so that it is sustainable over the lifespan in a meaningful way. So you don't have to have like unsustainable productivity that is emotionally chaotic. I will say one piece about the first point you made around the athlete mental health.
Yes.
Right? That's why it's so important for athletes to have mental health support and behavioral coaching, because in order to be an Olympian, you do have to kind of have this sprint of doing a lot of things to achieve the goal that you want and have some sort of balancing act around joy and hobby and creativity, which can offset how hard you're working. I recently heard Simone Biles speak, and she was talking about how she spent most of her youth not having fun. So the presenter was like, what is the most important thing to you in life right now? And she said, I just want to have fun. I want to be with my friends. She said that there was a 6-year period in her life where she didn't go to birthday parties because she was training on the weekends. And then she went on to become this incredible athlete. And so everyone's like, yeah, of course, that's what you get for working really hard. But there is a cost to it.
And you don't always get the medal or the success that you want from it, right? Sometimes you're just on the treadmill. I mean, one of the things we talk about is sort of the success, this outward success at personal expense. So could you talk a little bit, we chatted about this before we hit record, more about the cultures we live in or the way cultures set us up to be rewarded or motivated to get that success as a way to belong, to fit in, and as a way to supplement the emotional foundation that maybe wasn't there. I love that you talked about that in the book, because I think so many people don't go there. And I think that's where it starts.
That was one of the biggest motivators for me to expand on this and write this book, because as I was doing the research on the relationship between self-worth and achievement, one of the things I kept seeing over and over in like the academic literature is that unhealthy behaviors are a byproduct of unresolved emotions. As a therapist, that's all I'm doing, right?
Say it again.
Yeah, it's so true, right? Like unhealthy behaviors, dysfunctional behaviors are all a byproduct of unresolved emotions. There's something we are not dealing with that is showing up. And I saw that the consumer-facing literature, the self-help shelves, mostly the books at that time were about behavioral hacks. Change your life with these behavioral hacks. But the truth is, and I know this so deeply as a therapist, you can change your behaviors on the surface level. Mm-hmm. You don't attend to the emotions that are underneath it. The moment crisis comes, stress happens, your behaviors will fall. Like the systems will fall and you will resort back to your unhealthy habits. So understanding your emotions is really, really important in building healthier habits in your life. But when it comes to our cultures, the first experience we have with bartering achievement for connection unintentionally happens in our families. Mm-hmm. It's not mean parents. It's, well-meaning parents, but that system sets in there. If you become the child who got really good grades, you might get rewarded for it, right? Or parents will use like toys or free time or whatever as a way to encourage you to do better. And so you learn that, if I get good grades, or if I'm really well-mannered, or if I do really well in sports, like I get the extra cookie, or I get to stay up late a little bit, right? And that connection sits in very deeply. And then if you layer in your culture, like your ethnic culture, there are some cultures that value this type of achievement so much more. Mm-hmm. And then you layer in your family's like professional culture, right? There's some families that are, everyone is a lawyer. There's some families where everyone's a doctor, right? Like, or everyone's this or that or the other thing. And then you go to school. And the entire academic system is a false meritocracy, right? They're just telling you if you do well, you get good grades. And then you go to the workplace and it just continues onwards from there. And this is not to say that we have to dismantle the whole system. I think what we can do is right at the base with the parenting, teach your kids that they matter more outside of just the achievements that they're bringing in. So see if you can help your child diversify how they view themselves, not just as the good golden kid who is polite and finishes their food and like gets the homework done, but also the kid who is a creative, who is really good at like being a good friend, or, so a child who is passionate about recycling. Like, let's value those, things that they're bringing that help them see themselves as a whole human. That creates a resilience against the system.
And I think that that's the work for those of us who did get it hardwired early on. That's the work as adults, is to broaden that identity, take that identity, that very narrow identity, and say, ooh, what else do you like to do? How else can you value yourself? And that can take time. And that's a lot of the work you do that inspired the book. So could you maybe give us a couple of case examples of folks who have unlearned their toxic productivity?
I'll start just with myself. The reason I was doing the research on self-worth and achievement was not because I'm an academic, but it's because I was really struggling in my early 30s to feel good about the stuff that I was doing. And I grew up in a family that valued achievement. I grew up in a family as like the good girl, like the one who got the grades. We don't have to worry about Israa. Like she just does everything. And I'm like a middle child, so mediator. And I did all of the things. I hit the checklist. I was very achievement oriented in my 20s. And in the toxic productivity mindset, the myth is that happiness is on the other side of the checklist. It's just there. Like if we just hit that last check mark, like it's going to happen and you'll turn a corner and like, it'll just be a beautiful rainbow. So I was like that. I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for it. And I've done the things, but I'm also getting the achievements, but I'm not getting the happiness. Yeah. And so that's what prompted me to look into this, because I thought that maybe I had like high functioning depression or I just wasn't feeling good. And then I did like a screening and I talked to a doctor and I didn't meet the criteria for anything around that. And so then I knew that it was external to me. If it's not internal to me because there's some chemical imbalance, then it's external to me about how I'm spending my time, what I'm paying attention to, what my habits are. And, it took, I learned so much about decoupling your self-worth from achievement as I was writing the book. But one of the biggest things I learned is exactly what I just said right now, which is diversify where you get the good feelings from. Last year was my year of intentionally mediocre hobbies. I engaged in 4 hobbies at 3-month periods where it's very hard for me to not want to be good at something, but I was intentionally setting myself up to be mediocre about it. And it was hobbies that I could not monetize. It was hobbies that I couldn't brag about or create like a yardstick of, wow, I'm getting so good at this. It was hobbies I didn't perform at, so I wasn't putting it up on Instagram. I wasn't telling the world about it. Because all of those small micro decisions lead us to seeking validation.
Yeah.
If I'm putting up this like pottery thing that I did on Instagram, inevitably I will look to see how many people liked it.
Yes, I do that.
Because it's the way the system is built. Like we are looking for that, right? If I tell someone else about it, then I'm going to feel compelled because of my learning. I'm going to feel compelled to be like, oh, I got better at it. Oh, I did this, right? So that was the unlearning. How do you do something just for yourself, for the process of it, for the moment of it, without thinking about the outcome? So I took improv, I did pottery at home, I made puzzles. Puzzles are the best thing because you have to break them at the end. And I challenge you to break it without taking a photo. So you can make like 1,000-piece puzzle that took you a month. You just have to break it without taking a photo. There is no evidence that you achieved the outcome. Only you know it. And so it's about those type of ways where you can diversify your interests, right? I'd never done improv before. And I really had to break out of this mindset that I don't have time. A lot of people who struggle with toxic productivity, and these are people I work with, when I offer this, they'll say, nope, I don't have time. I have kids, I take care of my elder parents, I have a dog, I travel too much, my work is really busy, I have a side hustle. Like, how can I possibly do this, Israa? And so to that, there's so many things you can do for that, but that was the biggest shift that I first had to make.
Whitney calls these things invisible victories. So one of the things I learned from her was, sometimes we're not going to get awards for invisible victories, but those are fulfilling. Is there a point, we often talk about some of these lessons and embodying them somatically. So I want to, at what point, or did you know or feel, okay, I'm getting a sense of either and you talk about self-worth and self-esteem, this feeling like this is enough and I'm not projecting it, I'm not getting it validated. Was there a feeling that accompanied that? Like, how did you know you were in that state, right? Because we've never in that state. So how would you even know you're in this state?
Talk about nervous systems and embodiment.
Yeah, that is such a good question. And if I'm going to think back to those moments, I think there was like a feeling of like in the beginning, the first time I did it, I started off, like first hobby was like puzzling, and I'd never done puzzles before in my life, by the way. I felt very uncomfortable. So I think the first thing is, in order to really unlearn something, we have to master the art of discomfort. That I'm not like jumping to take the photo of the puzzle or tell somebody about it or whatever. But there was like this feeling of discomfort. And so really learning to regulate your nervous system when stuff like that happens. And you can do simple things like just deep breathing to like more complicated things like meditations and like very complicated breath work, right? But when it started to lock in was when I was in a state of flow. And I think as athletes, like you might really understand what that is, or like know that feeling. I don't have too many times in my life where I have felt like a really powerful state of just flow. And a lot of people can like work on it and activate it, but I just never because I was so toxic, productive mindset. Like I was always multitasking, like, doing two things at once. And I never really knew what that felt like up until recently. So it was that being in a state of flow where I was like, wow, like 30 minutes just went by and I'm just kind of like daydreaming and feeling good and being present and just doing the thing. And I'm not worried about a single other person. I'm not feeling compelled to be like, oh, I want to share this with my friend or whatever. Like I was just with me. And it's like a really amazing feeling. I think people can achieve it through different ways. Like dancers will say that when they're dancing, they feel this way, or, people who meditate very well can do it too. But even when I was writing a book, like I didn't really get into a state of flow because I was always like, just like thinking about the outcome of it. But it was really like after, and like my year of hobbies really helped me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think writing a book's necessarily good for the nervous system.
I witnessed that through Whitney.
Oh, poor Iris.
Can I ask one question about, we have a lot of listeners who are female or identify as female, and they're in their 40s to 60s. I'm wondering do you see any difference in how toxic productivity shows up in the genders? Because I'm just thinking about my own daughters, and I'm thinking, wow, am I saying they have to be a good girl? I'm kind of internalizing some of these things that you're saying. And do we do this more often with girls than we do with boys? And maybe I'm making a generalization. It's not based in science. It's just a curiosity.
Yeah. So, gender socialization is just like human learned behavior. It's not like endemic to the DNA. And absolutely, yes. The way the two, if you just think about the binary, the two predominant gender constructs are socialized, are in a way both feeding toxic productivity, but in a different format. And so I think definitely girls are very, oh, you're so good, you're so good, you're so good. So a lot of women struggle to say no. And that's the kind of how their toxic productivity starts to manifest, is they're overcommitting, they're overfunctioning, they're taking on too much. Now they're kind of everywhere. They're wanting to solve other people's problems, right? So like women are socialized to overfunction. Whereas men or young boys, are socialized, and this is like, again, these are all just social constructs, but they're socialized to be competitive and to constantly take, right? And like, even in the most innocuous ways, which we think is like so sweet, like, they'll like, little boys will often like steal something from like a little girl they have a crush on just to kind of get her attention. But like, and we're like, oh my gosh, he's just doing this because he likes you. But this idea is like, boys are socialized to take. And again, totally cultural things that we just teach. And so that taps into the toxic productivity mindset of like constantly needing to provide. Like, I need to be the best. I need to be the best. I need to be the best. And you're comparing yourself. Comparison is a really powerful mechanism that activates toxic productivity. And it's also a really powerful mechanism of disconnecting you from your values. And so, you kind of, often you see this is like people will just chase goals, but they don't really know why they're doing that. And so I think that's kind of how I see it across the gender line. But these things are porous, like they can happen either way. But those I would say is like the most primary way. And I think when we think about it, and I'm not like a parenting expert, but I do kind of have a few thoughts on this stuff, is it can be really helpful to kind of bring the attention back to your child's emotions instead of how you feel about the emotions. So as a parent, because that externalizes it, right? So if your kid has done really well, saying something like, you must be so proud of yourself, like you saw how hard you worked, or you put so much effort into it, instead of, I'm so proud of you only. So like you're really trying to encourage them to go inwards about their emotions and their realizations and all of those things, as opposed to, like, I was always like, oh, I just want to show my parents. And I mean, external validation is important, but what happens is it becomes the only place of validation. So we can't eradicate external validation. That's necessary for normal development, but we have to boost the internal validation as well.
And how do you retrain that in your clients who have been trained, to in that toxic productivity mindset? There's a lot of retraining that happens in this relationship with self. So could you talk a little bit about maybe a case example?
Yeah.
Or go back to you.
No, in order to like retrain anything, you have to become aware of what the original learning is. So, I mean, I've worked with clients who very much believe that, they're only good if other people accept them. Like, I have to show up in this way for somebody else because you're getting that validation that's external. And what that does on the inside, it creates a lot of fear. But we are not aware that this fear is harmful. It just feels like, oh, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I need you to like me. So in working with clients like that, I help them first identify what some of their thought patterns are. And that requires you to kind of be aware of like, what are the feelings that are coming up when you want to say yes to somebody, even though you feel uncomfortable, right? Or you want to agree to doing something, even though you don't want to. What are the thoughts that are happening? What are the fears that are coming up? What do you think will happen? And once you can identify the thought patterns, you can actually pull themes from it. And once you pull the theme from it, then the person becomes so aware of their mindset. And awareness alone does not change behavior. So what we have to do with that awareness is create some habit changes that can help you tap into the new mindset, that helps you embody the new mindset, and then you implement it in small incremental habit changes. So, if you really have a hard time saying no to people, can you actually first get in the habit of delaying the yes, right? And so that you kind of practice that in small stake environments where you just ask for time before saying yes. You don't say no, you just say, can I get back to you? Eventually say yes, right? Then you up that a little bit. And then you say, okay, next time you're going to ask for time, and then you're going to actually say no, but you're going to do a no and yes. So you're going to say no to the ask, and then you'll say, but I can do this one thing instead. And then you practice that a little bit. And then you eventually get to the place of training someone to be like, no, I can't do this. And so this is kind of like how you can take someone through unlearning, but you have to first become aware of it.
Yeah. It's all over the beginning of your book. Internal family systems is a model that Iris and I have I've been trained in it. We've been experiencing it, found it super useful. I'm curious on your take on thinking of our productive parts as ones that are protecting us, protecting the part, the more emotionally needy ones.
Yeah. First of all, I'm a huge fan of IFS. I personally am not trained in it, but I would love to. I know there's very involved training.
You've got puzzles to make.
But it's like so powerful. My goodness. But when it comes to productivity being the part that is protecting you, absolutely. It becomes a shield. It becomes a way to prevent people from seeing you as vulnerable, prevent people as seeing you as someone who is lacking or deficient in some way. So if you feel deficient internally, let's say you have a little bit of a low self-worth, you're not sure about whether you're good enough, your productivity can help convince other people that you are. So externally, you appear as though you have high self-worth. And so that gap between how other people view you and how you really feel about yourself is where the dysfunction happens and the dysregulation happens. And so productivity is absolutely an armor that people, and that's not to say that all productivity is an armor, but if you are somebody who struggles with toxic productivity, you utilize this as a way for other people to control how other people view you. You are like trying to influence how they kind of see you in their minds. It's also a way to avoid feeling difficult emotions. So if you feel triggered by something and now suddenly this deep shame from childhood is like activated in your body and you're like, whoa, I do not want to deal with this right now. You're going to get up and you're going to do something to kind of neutralize that feeling. But the truth is the feeling doesn't go away. It just goes back where it came from, and it'll show up another time. And I think that's that like relationship between our emotions and our behaviors.
And that's the cycle that goes on with body image as well. And so that's where that awareness piece, oh, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. I might be really inclined to go please my boss, right? Or do something else that's got to have external validation, and catching yourself and first starting to see your own patterning. I love that you have a lot of patterns in your book, because I think, these circular patterns, because that's what happens. And if we can interrupt them, then we've got a chance at a different experience for ourselves. So I love the call to awareness. And for folks listening going, ooh, I might have some toxic productivity, like starting to witness yourself is a great way to start being in relationship to yourself.
I wanted to add one thing to that, like, when it comes to like awareness, and I think this definitely happens in like the body image space a lot, is we become aware of the pattern, right? And then we immediately judge ourselves for it. And so that essentially deepens the pattern even more. I'm doing this like unhealthy thing. I'm doing it again. And then we start being really mean to ourselves. Yeah. And that really keeps us locked. And so I think that it's so important that we think about those two things as one. Identifying the patterns and being kind to yourself with that awareness. Like the awareness, compassionate, because when it's not, it's actually mirroring some inner voice that is like has been absorbed from your childhood, and that fuels that shame and dysfunction. Yeah, and to mirror that, and that is like probably the hardest thing.
Right, and I'm so glad you called that out. Like the muscles that in the book is non-judgment, curiosity, and compassion, because those are the muscles that we need in relationship, and those are the muscles that if we can bring those three things to ourselves, there's space, right? Shame closes down the space.
You also said thank you for choice. Whitney, last time you said choice too, because I think, I know this is about athletes, but so many athletes, people are very surprised to find that a lot of athletes drive from a place of very low self-worth, even though they might be gold medalists. And I think when they reach the point where they might need to retire, often don't for this purpose, is like, I just need to keep doing this so that I can have a sense of belonging, so I have a sense of identity, and it's very wrapped up. And one of the things I always say about, I probably would have wanted to have choice sooner. So if we don't uninterrupt these patterns, we take away our sense of choice. Okay, I don't need to go out and do this thing or this productive thing. I have other opportunities. I have other choices. So I try, when I work with athletes, I try to tell them like, are you sure you want to go in this direction? You also have these, and we kind of work on that. So you talked about that with me, Whitney, of that sense of choice. You take away the sense of choice if you don't stop the pattern a little bit.
Because there's an automaticity to toxic productivity.
Right.
Right? We don't have choice. We have to. Our nervous system says, this is the only way to feel safe, is to go achieve this or do that or get that accolade. Yeah. And one of the things I love that you call out in your book is that the self-help industry and the growth, I want to be the best person I can be, also really colludes with this toxic productivity in a really sneaky way.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, self-growth has become this like arena of like, I feel like the industry, and I know like I'm a part of it because my book is like under personal growth and development, but I always say to people, like, literally only pick this up if it feels resonant to you. Like, you don't have to. You don't have to finish the whole book either. You can just pick like 3 chapters that resonate with you. Because I think, it creates a sense of like perpetual inadequacy. Now, if you are constantly reading and only reading personal development and self-help, you are constantly going to think that you need to fix something about yourself. And we are all walking around acting like we are the biggest projects that we need to work on. But we're not, right? And so having balance is really important. And self-growth, I think the idea suddenly becomes locked in that there is this ideal version of me. And in order for me to get there, there's these checklists that I have to do, and I have to do them exactly the right way, and I have to track it, and I have to tell other people about it. And if I don't do it, then I am a failure, right? And I have worked with people who have taken their self-care habits to this place where they have a list of things that they feel like they must achieve. And this case study I actually talked about, right? This young woman, so pleasant and, just like a high achieving individual, works really hard, but her weekend is just a solid checklist of stuff that she needs to do in order to fit the mold of somebody who cares for herself. But what happens is it's happening so unintentionally, it's only happening because other people are also doing it, that it's not actually self-care. And so I'd say the same thing for self-growth, personal growth. Like if you're just consuming because the book came out, you saw it on a list, or your friends are talking about it, and you're constantly taking courses and master classes, then you're never stopping enough to A, absorb that material, B, decide, there's that choice piece, whether or not it's relevant to you. Is it helpful? Does it take you to the life you actually want? At C, it is constantly putting you in a state of perpetual inadequacy. And so that is a really horrible and lonely place to be in. If you constantly feel like you're doing everything wrong, you're eventually going to start believing that about yourself. So my ask to everybody, literally, is please read more fiction. Read like one nonfiction, one fiction, one, like balance your life out. Like read the books that you feel like really like connect to your life, and take the things that apply. Don't take the things that don't apply. Read fiction books, listen to a variety of podcasts, watch movies and documentaries. Like we need to be diverse in our life. That's the only way we can feel good about ourselves outside of achievement.
Oh, I love that. I love that. There are 2 parts of the book that really moved me. One, the sentence, I'm calling for a radical reimagining of what productivity means. And this is just one part of your career. So could you say a little bit more about all the ways you are putting forth things in the world to achieve that mission?
Yeah. So when I say radical reimagining, what I mean is our definition of productivity is very narrow right now. And I would love for people to think about productivity as something that is based in their values and not just, the arena of competition that other people are doing. I would love for people to think about their productivity, including rest and breaks, using that as a way to actually have sustainable long-term productivity. And I would like to have people think about hyper-productive moments of their life as seasons. We don't have to be hyper-productive all the time, and we don't have to be it in every arena of our life. So, in the book, I kind of go through these 6 case vignettes, and very intentionally, they're all different parts of life. Parenting, self-help and personal growth, work, relationships, romantic relationships. Like this is showing up everywhere for us because it's a mindset. And to think about like, I'm just going to be like very focused on one part of my life, and in my other parts of life, I will invite being mediocre and understand a good enough point and being present and, intentional and all of that stuff. I do this work through a lot of workshops and speaking engagements. I do a lot of corporate wellness stuff because I think we need to shift some of the mindset there. And then in my personal work as a therapist, I definitely work with people in different areas of life who are struggling with this mindset, whether it's in the romantic relationships, friendships, financial anxiety, or parenting. And then I also work in digital health and using technology to make mental health more accessible on how we can actually leverage some of the technology for good, and use it as a way for people to start feeling better about themselves.
Israa, I know we're at the end and we had a bunch of things we wanted to talk about. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you want to get out there you think is really important for our audience to know or to talk about?
I'll say two things. One is we've talked about this a lot today, but I really want to double click on it, which is really take the time to connect with your emotions, understand them, identify them. You can work with a therapist, you can work with a coach, you could do group sessions, like whatever feels accessible. But I think if we can be a little bit more emotionally healthy, we have emotionally healthier families, which has this ripple effect on culture and society. And so helping yourself understand your emotions is really important. And the second thing is, if you are going to embark on this journey of self-growth and, development, I really just encourage you to do one thing at a time. Make one change at it. Let's say even you read my book, right? There's probably 47 different exercises in there about different things in your life. Don't try to implement all of it. Just pick one, try it for 3 months. I think there's a lot of beauty in becoming. We're all just trying to just be the end product, the end version of ourselves. But there's a lot of nice, beautiful, joy in becoming, in letting yourself kind of grow.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, thank you for all the many ways you are sharing this mission with the world. And I also think this is a great journey to do with somebody, with your friends, with your loved ones, with a therapist, with a coach. It's the kind of work I do with folks. It's so much of why Iris and I have the podcast is to attend to your own becoming. I think you said that really well, rather than being in an automated chase of something that never quite arrives. Right. So I thought a fun way to end might be if we each share a fun fiction book that we've enjoyed with our audience as a way of untraining being more productive. So I recently enjoyed Leanne Moriarty. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. Big Little Lies, Truly Madly Guilty. I like her dialogue and the narrator on Audible. So I'm going to offer that one out there.
So I just finished reading Westwood Giraffes, and it's by a woman called Linda. I don't think I want to say this right, but Linda Rutledge. And essentially historical fiction based on the true event that in 1938, 2 giraffes were being brought to the San Diego Zoo, but their ship crashed and they floated into the New York harbor, in Manhattan. And in 1938, they were driven from New York to San Diego on a rickety little thing. In the context of the Dust Bowl migration, the Great Depression, and the war. So the story is a fictionalized narrative of the driver who took them through.
Oh.
And it was so fun. It's just such a fun book.
Iris?
Oh my God. I like fantasy novels. I feel like non-academic here. So I would get into the stuff that people really like. We have the ACOTAR books, so A Court of Thorns and Roses. And then there was one, I think it's The Curious Life of Adie LaRue or something like that. So I'm more of a fantasy novel where the female is the heroine in the book. So, yeah, I don't know. It's funny is this is part of my untraining. I have very much a resonance with you, Israa. Like, I didn't grow up, my mother's Chinese. So when we grew up, there wasn't like reading for pleasure. There wasn't like any of that stuff. So, yeah. So it's funny, even like me saying like, I read this fiction novel, I'm kind of like shrinking into my seat. Like, do I tell them or I edit this out? So, so yeah, I'm still working on Untraining, and I like the fantasy novels.
Oh,
All right. Well, but you did learn to ski in the spirit of mediocrity, right? You learned to ski, right,
Ira? It is the most mediocre skiing of all time. Thank you. At the end of every podcast, Whitney, what do we say?
Keep untraining.
Keep untraining. And if you like what you hear, please make sure to go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. It's both a threat and an invitation. And also like us on YouTube. Keep listening. And we love that you're part of our tribe. Thanks.